Hamburg, West Germany. March 1987. An elderly man sat in his modest apartment, listening to the radio as he did every evening. The program was a historical documentary about Stalingrad, 44 years after the battle that had consumed an entire army. The narrator's voice was calm, clinical. Among the mysteries of Stalingrad is a series of radio transmissions from January 1943. A German unit, surrounded 40 kilometers south of the city, sent the same message for 11 consecutive days. Just one word: Halten. Hold. The old man's coffee cup trembled in his hand. His wife, Greta, looked up from her knitting. "Karl, are you all right?" Karl Meissner set down the cup slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter something fragile in the room. His lips moved, barely audible. "I sent those messages." Greta's needles stopped. "That's impossible. You were never at Stalingrad. You told me you served in France." He turned to face her, and for the first time in 44 years of marriage, she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not fear, not shame, something deeper. "I died at Stalingrad," he said quietly. "For 11 days, I was a dead man, pressing Morse code keys. And now, for the first time, I'm going to tell someone what those messages really meant." But why had he waited 44 years? And what truth could be so terrible that a man would erase his own past to escape it? To understand what happened in that frozen bunker outside Stalingrad, we must first understand who Karl Meissner was, and perhaps more importantly, who he was not. He was not a Nazi. German military records, declassified in 1982, show that Meissner had joined the Wehrmacht in 1939, before the war, as part of mandatory service. He was 22 years old, a telecommunications technician from a small town near Leipzig. His father had been a telegraph operator for the German Postal Service. Karl had learned Morse code at age 12, sitting beside his father's workstation, fascinated by the rhythm of dots and dashes. In 1941, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union, Feldwebel Sergeant Karl Meissner was assigned to the 297th Infantry Division as a radio operator. By all accounts, he was competent but unremarkable. His commanding officers noted in performance reviews that he followed orders precisely and maintained excellent radio discipline. He was not a hero. He was not a villain. He was a technician caught in the machinery of the largest military conflict in human history. By November 1942, that machinery was beginning to break down. The German Sixth Army under General Friedrich Paulus had pushed deep into Stalingrad, engaging in brutal urban combat against Soviet forces. The city was being destroyed, house by house, street by street. And then, on November 19th, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus, a massive encirclement that trapped 290,000 German soldiers in a pocket around Stalingrad. Meissner's unit, a supply and communications detachment, was 40 kilometers south of the city when the Soviet pincers closed. They found themselves cut off behind enemy lines, with no immediate way forward or back. What followed would become one of the war's strangest episodes of communication. But to call it strange is to misunderstand what desperation does to the human mind. For the first 3 days after encirclement, Meissner's unit remained mobile. 27 men, 3 vehicles, radio equipment. Their orders were simple: maintain contact with divisional headquarters, relay any intelligence about Soviet positions, and await extraction. But extraction never came. The vehicles ran out of fuel on January 8, 1943. The temperature had dropped to minus 34 degrees Celsius, and the men realized, with the cold clarity that comes from absolute isolation, that no one was coming for them. It was on January 9th that the order arrived, the last order they would ever receive. The message came through at 14:37 hours on January 9th, 1943. Meissner had set up the radio in the remains of a Soviet bunker, partially collapsed, but offering some protection from the wind. The entire unit huddled around a single fire made from broken furniture they'd found in an abandoned farmhouse. Oberleutnant First Lieutenant Hans Richter decoded the message himself. According to Meissner's 1987 testimony, Richter read it aloud once, then stared at the paper for a full minute before speaking again. The message was simple. All units, maintain positions, transmit status every 6 hours, reinforce defensive lines. Führer has ordered 6th Army to hold Stalingrad at all costs. Supply by air continuing, hold. Richter looked around at the 27 men under his command. They had no defensive lines. They had no position worth holding. They were 40 kilometers behind Soviet lines with no ammunition, no food, and no realistic hope of resupply.
"What do we transmit?" asked Unteroffizier Corporal Wilhelm Strauss. Meissner, who had been silent until now, spoke. "We transmit what we're ordered to transmit, sir." Richter nodded slowly. "Meissner, send this message. Unit status, position held. Ammunition sufficient. Morale good. Awaiting orders." Meissner's fingers moved across the Morse key. 3 minutes later, the message was sent. It was a lie, but it was also, in a strange way, true. They were holding their position because they had nowhere else to go. And morale, in the peculiar mathematics of hopelessness, was neither good nor bad. It had simply ceased to be measurable. What happened next is where the story becomes difficult to verify.
Meissner's 1987 account is the only source, but certain details align with Soviet intelligence reports from the period, suggesting his testimony, however incredible, may be accurate. January 10, 1943. The first man died during the night. Private Georg Keller, 19 years old, from Munich. He had wrapped himself in 2 blankets and fallen asleep by the fire. When they tried to wake him for morning watch, he was frozen solid. They couldn't bury him. The ground was iron. They placed his body outside the bunker, where it would remain frozen, preserved in the posture of sleep. At 600 hours, Meissner sent the scheduled transmission. Halten. Hold. At 1200 hours. Halten. At 1800 hours. Halten. By January 12th, 6 more men had died. Frostbite had claimed fingers, toes, entire limbs. One man, delirious from hunger, walked out of the bunker into the snow and simply kept walking until he disappeared into the white expanse. Oberleutnant Richter gathered the surviving men. "We have 2 choices," he said. "We can try to break through Soviet lines on foot, which means almost certain death, or we can wait here, conserve energy, and hope that German forces break through to us." The vote was 15-5 in favor of waiting. Richter turned to Meissner. "Continue transmissions. Every 6 hours. Same message." "Sir," Meissner asked, "what should I transmit if you're not here to give orders?" Richter's face was gaunt, his lips cracked and bleeding. "You transmit what you're transmitting now. Halten. Until someone tells you to stop." At this point in his 1987 testimony, Meissner paused for nearly 3 minutes. The interviewer, a historian from the University of Hamburg, waited. Finally, Meissner continued. "I understood what he was really ordering me to do. He was telling me to outlive everyone, to be the last one, because someone had to keep sending the message. But why? If the unit was doomed, if no rescue was coming, what purpose did the messages serve?" The answer would not emerge until Soviet archives were partially opened in 1991, and what they revealed suggested that Meissner's transmissions had an audience that neither he nor his commanding officer could have imagined. January 15, 1943. 12 men remained alive. The radio batteries were failing. Meissner had calculated they had enough power for perhaps 30 more transmissions. After that, silence. He mentioned this to Richter, who was now too weak to stand. The lieutenant had given his rations to younger soldiers for 3 days, a decision that was killing him by degrees. "Then we have 10 more days," Richter whispered. 3 transmissions daily, that gives them 10 days to reach us." "Who, sir?" Meissner asked. "Who is them?" Richter smiled, a terrible expression on his frozen face. "Anyone. Everyone. Someone." On January 16th, Soviet soldiers appeared on the horizon. The Germans watched from firing ports in the bunker as a patrol, perhaps 20 men, passed within 800 meters of their position. The Soviets moved in formation, checking abandoned positions, looking for survivors or intelligence. The Germans held absolutely still. No fire, no sound. They watched the patrol pass, knowing that engagement meant immediate death, but also knowing that capture meant a different kind of death in Soviet prison camps. When the patrol was gone, Richter made a decision that, according to Meissner, defined everything that followed. "We're not soldiers anymore," Richter said. "We're witnesses. The Wehrmacht is dying at Stalingrad and someone needs to document it. Someone needs to keep transmitting so that the world knows we were here, that we held, even when holding was meaningless." At 1800 hours, Meissner sent the scheduled transmission, Halten. But now the word meant something different. It was no longer a military status report. It was a tombstone inscription, written one letter at a time, 3 times a day, transmitted into the void. By January 19th, only 5 men remained conscious. 3 others lay in the corner of the bunker, breathing but unresponsive, their bodies consuming themselves for warmth that would never come. Meissner's fingers had frozen to the Morse key during the morning transmission. He had to pour warm water from their last canteen over his hand to free himself. The skin tore. Blood spotted the metal key. He wrapped his fingers in strips of cloth torn from a dead man's uniform and continued the transmission schedule. 6 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 18 o'clock. Halten, Halten, Halten. The word became a rhythm, a heartbeat, the only proof that something human still existed in this frozen tomb. While Meissner transmitted his messages into apparent silence, 40 kilometers north, Soviet intelligence officer Captain Dmitry Volkov was listening. According to KGB files declassified in 1991, Volkov had been tasked with monitoring German radio traffic in the Stalingrad encirclement. His mission was to identify German unit positions, troop movements, and command structure communications. What he found instead puzzled him. One transmission source, designated Quell 47, Source 47, was broadcasting from an area far outside the main German pocket. The transmissions were brief, regular, and contained only a single word. Volkov's initial assessment, filed on January 11, 1943. Source 47 may be disinformation or decoy transmission. Recommend low priority. But as days passed, the regularity of the transmissions caught his attention. He began plotting them on a map. Every 6 hours, precisely on schedule, the same location, the same message. On January 17th, Volkov wrote a second report. Source 47 continues regular transmission schedule despite being isolated behind our lines. Unit either unaware of situation or deliberately maintaining communications discipline. Recommend reconnaissance to determine unit size and capability. The reconnaissance patrol was dispatched on January 18th. It passed within 800 meters of Meissner's position, saw abandoned vehicles but no signs of life, and reported back, no active enemy presence detected. Volkov noted in his report, Source 47 continued transmission during patrol proximity. Conclusion, either underground position or small unit with excellent concealment discipline. What Volkov couldn't know was that he was listening to the death rattle of a German unit, transformed into Morse code. January 20th, 1943. Feldwebel Karl Meissner was alone. Oberleutnant Richter had died during the night. The last 3 soldiers followed within hours. They simply stopped breathing, one after another, as if some agreement had been reached that continued existence required too much effort. Meissner sat beside the radio, surrounded by frozen corpses of men he'd known for 2 years. The bunker was silent except for the wind outside and his own breathing, which had become labored and shallow. He looked at his watch. 11:47 hours, 13 minutes until the scheduled transmission. Every rational part of his mind screamed at him to stop. No one was listening. No one cared. He was alone, dying, in a frozen bunker 40 kilometers behind enemy lines. The war would continue without him.
History would forget this place. But at 1200 hours, his fingers moved to the Morse key. Tick, tick, tick. Halten. Why? In his 1987 testimony, Meissner struggled to explain. It wasn't about orders anymore. It wasn't even about duty. I think it was about remaining human. As long as I kept transmitting, I was still a soldier, still part of something larger than myself. The moment I stopped, I would just be a dying animal in a hole. January 21st, 1943. Morning transmission sent at 6 o'clock. Halten. Meissner's hands were no longer functioning properly. Each press of the Morse key required conscious effort, forcing fingers that wanted to curl into frozen claws. At 1000 hours, he heard voices outside the bunker. Russian voices. A Soviet patrol had discovered the position. Meissner could hear boots crunching in snow, commands being shouted, the sound of equipment being moved. They were checking the abandoned vehicles, looking for salvageable supplies or intelligence materials. He made no sound. He sat motionless in the darkness of the bunker, surrounded by the dead, waiting. The patrol spent 30 minutes investigating the area, then moved on. At 1200 hours, Meissner sent his transmission. Halten. According to Soviet records, Captain Volkov noted, Source 47, transmitted during patrol presence. Unit either has excellent counter-reconnaissance capability or patrol failed to locate position. Recommend increased surveillance. At 1800 hours, Halten. January 22nd, 0600 hours, Halten. At 0900 hours, Meissner lost consciousness. When he woke, his watch showed 1422. He had missed the noon transmission. For the first time in 13 days, the schedule had been broken. He stared at the radio for a long time. The batteries were nearly dead. He had perhaps 3 or 4 transmissions remaining. Then silence, permanent and final. At 1800 hours, he sent the transmission. Halten. January 23rd. Morning transmission sent at 600. His vision was blurring. He couldn't feel his feet. He knew with the clarity of the dying that he would not survive another day. At 1200 hours, he prepared to send what would be his final transmission. But this time, he broke protocol. His frozen fingers moved across the key, sending not one word, but several. Halten bis zum Ende. 21 Mann sind hier gestorben. Zeuge? Meissner. Hold until the end. 21 men died here. Witness? Meissner. Then he destroyed the radio's encryption wheels, as regulations required. He removed his identity tags and placed them beside the radio, along with a brief written report documenting the unit's last days. At approximately 1500 hours on January 23, 1943, Feldwebel Karl Meissner walked out of the bunker into the snow. According to his 1987 testimony, I was ready to die. I wanted to die, but I didn't want to die in that tomb with the others. I walked south toward where I thought German lines might be, knowing I wouldn't reach them. After about 2 kilometers, I collapsed. I woke up 3 days later in a Soviet field hospital. Here is where verified history becomes murky. Soviet records show that a German soldier, identified as POW-2847K, was recovered in critical condition on January 23, 1943, approximately 42 kilometers south of Stalingrad. Medical records note severe frostbite, malnutrition, and hypothermia. The prisoner survived, was interrogated, and eventually transferred to a POW camp in Kazakhstan. In Soviet records, he is listed as Meissner Koi Feldwebel, 297th Infantry Division. But here's the puzzle. German military records list Karl Meissner as missing in action, presumed dead, January 1943. His family received notification in March 1943. No body was recovered. No burial location exists. When Meissner was repatriated from Soviet captivity in 1949, he told German authorities he had served in France, never in Stalingrad. He provided enough verifiable details about the 297th Division's activities in France
where the unit had been stationed before transfer to the Eastern Front to satisfy interrogators. He was issued new identity papers. He returned to civilian life. He married Greta in 1952. He worked as a postal clerk in Hamburg. For 38 years, he told no one the truth. As for the bunker, Soviet forces discovered it on January 28, 1943. Captain Volkov's report describes finding 21 German bodies, 1 radio set, identity tags for Feldwebel Karl Meissner, and a handwritten document in German. The document was translated and filed. In it, Meissner had written a brief account of the unit's final days, ending with, "We were ordered to hold. We held. This is our proof." The radio transmissions had been real. Volkov had been listening, but the impact of those transmissions on the broader war was precisely zero. No German relief force came. No plans were changed. The Sixth Army surrendered at Stalingrad on February 2, 1943. The messages had changed nothing, except perhaps the definition of what it meant to follow an order to its absolute limit. What did those transmissions cost? 21 men died in that bunker, some from cold, some from starvation, some from wounds that would have been treatable anywhere else. All died following orders that had become meaningless before the first message was sent. Meissner survived, but what he lost might be more profound than physical death. He lost his identity. He spent 38 years denying his own past, living as a man who had never sent those messages, never watched his comrades die, never pressed Morse keys with frozen fingers while surrounded by corpses. When asked in 1987 why he had finally revealed the truth, his answer was simple. "I heard that radio program, and I realized that those messages had become a historical curiosity. People were speculating about what they meant, who sent them, why they continued for so long, and I thought, I am the only person alive who knows the truth. If I die without telling it, then those 21 men will have died for nothing, and no one will ever understand what Halten really meant." Meissner's testimony in 1987 created a brief controversy among military historians. Some embraced it as a remarkable first-hand account of Stalingrad's periphery, the story of forgotten soldiers dying beyond the main battle. Others questioned its accuracy, noting inconsistencies in dates and unit designations. Soviet records, when finally accessed after 1991, confirmed some details: the radio transmissions, the bunker location, the discovery of bodies, but they couldn't definitively prove that WW2 was the same man who became Karl Meissner of Hamburg. The German Federal Archives conducted an investigation in 1989. They concluded that the available evidence suggests Feldwebel Meissner's account is substantially accurate, though some details cannot be verified with certainty. In 1992, Meissner traveled to Russia with a German television crew. They attempted to locate the bunker site. The area had been developed, a small industrial facility now occupying the approximate location. Nothing remained. Meissner stood on the frozen ground, looking at the buildings. "Somewhere underneath here," he said quietly, 21 men are still holding their position. He died in 1995 at age 78. His obituary in the Hamburg newspaper mentioned his service in World War II, but made no reference to Stalingrad or the transmissions. The ultimate question remains unanswered. Was Meissner a hero, following orders with extraordinary discipline under impossible circumstances? Or was he a fool, wasting the last battery power on messages that changed nothing, serving a regime that had already abandoned him? Perhaps he was neither. Perhaps he was simply a man who kept pressing keys because stopping required a decision he wasn't prepared to make. A man who found meaning in routine when meaning had been stripped from everything else. The Morse code for Halten is 8 letters, 31 distinct signals, sent 3 times daily for 11 days, 99 transmissions total, each one a small act of defiance against the entropy of war, against the cold that wanted to silence everything. In the end, that's what those messages were. Not strategic communications, not intelligence gathering, not even really military discipline. They were proof that someone was still there, still human, still holding, even when holding meant nothing at all.